Hi everybody, this is Saad for the Sad Truth. Some of you have noticed that over the past few months I've been relentlessly satirizing Bill Nye, the science guy, because of his positions on the supposed links between climate change and terrorism. Now, most sane people understand why I would go about such a relentless pursuit, but some members of the Nye Rage Brigade were very upset with me that I would consistently criticize him. Now, I criticize him not because I have any personal dislike for the man. I don't criticize his person. I criticize this singular position that he's taken, which is a profoundly important position. And it becomes even more profoundly important when we recognize the type of platform that this gentleman has, right? If he were some quack with 3 Twitter followers and he were espousing these positions, then one can be charitable. But if he's given such a platform and then he espouses such profoundly suicidal stupidity, then there is no end to how much and for how long one can go in satirizing his or her position. You would certainly not be pleased if a physicist were teaching at university that the earth is flat. You would not be pleased if a biology professor were teaching that evolution is a Zionist hoax. So to argue that there is a postulated link, and he actually proposed that it's very conceivable, very plausible, a link between climate change and what's happening in Syria and in Iraq, and hence going downstream, what happened in some of the attacks in Europe, is grotesque. Now, I could offer a deep statistical and epistemological argument for why his reasoning, if we can call it that, is faulty, but let me start by satirizing it by drawing some analogies. Now, it is absolutely true that Barry White, the singer, might be in part to blame for the Syrian crisis. Right? He's a multiplier effect, to use the sort of stupid aping that some of these Nye Rage Brigade guys use. Now, let me explain why. It is quite conceivable that when the current dictator of Israel, Bashar al-Assad, was conceived, it was at the time, if I'm not mistaken, when Barry White was at the zenith of his career. I'm guessing early 70s, early to mid 70s. Now, I don't remember exactly how old Bashar al-Assad is, but let's, for the sake of this fun anecdote, suppose that what led his parents, the former dictator, his dad, and his wife, the mother of the current dictator, to feel amorous that day was that they put that beautiful baby-making music of Barry White, and that's what actually got them in the mood. Had they that day not gotten in the mood by playing that music, it is literally true that it would have not, maybe he wouldn't have been conceived, because maybe the father would have engaged in some solo sex that night, and then that spermatozoa that led to the insemination that resulted in the current dictator being born would have been lost forevermore in the shower. And so it is quite conceivable that Barry White is ultimately to blame. And actually, that is a more direct link, assuming that that link were true, than the argument that, there was a drought, and this drought led to crop failures, and these crop failures led to mass migration from rural areas to urban areas. You see, I follow the argument. And that's what served as a multiplier effect. Well, guess what? This is known as idiotic butterfly effect thinking. Everything ultimately is related to everything else. As I explained in a previous clip, I think it was Sad Truth 29, when I was criticizing Noam Chomsky thinking, when we're thinking about ISIS, we don't need to argue that it's due to our intervention in Iraq. We can push back unfold the causal link all the way to the out of Africa hypothesis, right? I mean, it is literally true that had our descendants not walked out of Africa, ISIS would never have come to be, right? I mean, that is literally true, right? So there is no end to the number of plausible butterfly effects that one can propose, right? Here, let me give you another one. The birth of my children was caused in part by my obesity. Let's untangle that argument. Some of you may have heard me mention this publicly in a previous, I think, chat. But let me mention it again for those of you who might have missed it. The way that I met my wife was I was at the gym one time, and I was doing some weights. A guy passed by and said, "Hey, professor." And another guy whom I'd never met heard that first gentleman address me in terms of a salutation by saying, "Hey, professor," walks up to me and says, "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear the gentleman address you as professor. Are you a professor? And if so, of what?" I explained to the gentleman what kind of professor I was. And he was at the time president of a company. They had some in-house executive education programs. He asked me if I would be willing to come and give some in-house executive education to his employees. Each week I would talk about a different topic: psychology of advertising, psychology of consumer behavior, psychology of decision making. And in that audience was my eventual wife. Now, why was I going to the gym? Well, in part, I was going to the gym because I was overweight then, and I continue to be overweight. So it is absolutely true that my obesity was a multiplier effect, was one of several reasons that led to my children being born. Had I not gone to the gym concerned that I'm overweight that day, I would have never met that gentleman, and then all of the causal consequences that follow. When a soccer team wins the World Cup, we could argue that the reason why they won the World Cup is precisely because of the unique neuronal firings in their brains. But that would not help us much. But that's literally true. It is the unique firings of the neuronal activation patterns of the winning team that led to them becoming world champions. Epistemologically, this carries zero explanatory power. It's idiotic. It's a grotesque affront to reason. So when it comes to Syria and Iraq and the rest of the Middle East, no, it has nothing to do with climate change. Now, that doesn't mean, as some idiots have written to me, that I'm suggesting that climate conflicts may not occur. Of course, when you have scarcity of resources, that can result in conflict. So arguing that the situation in the Middle East is not driven by any concerns with climate change does not imply that, number one, climate change is not happening in the world, nor number two, that climate change could not be linked in other conflicts, right? Put on your thinking caps, stop acting like idiots, and actually reason, okay? If this logic were true about climate change and terrorism in the Middle East, then I've got the source for the next grand, massive onslaught of terrorists. You ready? Let me read it for you. The Atacama Desert is the driest place on earth. The Atacama people, this is in South America, have been living in this profoundly punishing, drought-ridden world for many, many years. And yet, as far as I can tell, if I look at lists of conflicts and lists of terrorist acts, I haven't really seen much coming from the Atacama people. But maybe they're just laying low, and we will get that big attack at some point in the future. So again, one can construct so-called plausible arguments to link through butterfly thinking any two variables that you want in the universe. That doesn't mean that it is the optimal or correct way of linking these variables. And by the way, the paper in question that some of these castrati typically propose is a paper that was published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, and I'll put a link to it at the bottom of the descriptor, where the paper is actually just a paper on the drought in that region. And then they offer a speculative, hand-waving argument as to how that could have led to the Syrian crisis. That doesn't mean that they actually have any statistical or any scientific evidence that there is such a link. The paper that people are so quick to point to actually doesn't show any such link, right? So again, my point in satirizing Bill Nye, and so to conclude, is not because, I'm a mean guy who wishes to repeatedly beat a dead horse. It's because we need to speak honestly and openly about the realities that we face. And when it comes to the 100 possible factors that somehow are relevant in explaining the crisis in Syria and the Middle East, solar panels is really, really, really low on that list. Have a great weekend, everybody. Talk to you soon.